Welcome to Focus on Scholarship. I'm Carrie Cooper, Dean of Libraries, and your host for today's session. The graduate school and our libraries have a shared goal of bringing focus and awareness to the exciting scholarly and creative achievements of our academic community. Our guest today is Mike Austin, a faculty member in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Eastern Kentucky University. Mike is editor and contributor to the book Football and Philosophy, Going Deep, which came out in 2008, and his most recent book on parenting that came out in August 2009, Wise Stewards, The Philosophical Foundations of Christian Parenting. Today, we are going to talk about both books. Let's talk first about your newest book on philosophy and parenting. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's the result of several years of research where I've done more stuff with the scholarly aspect of philosophy in the family, but I wanted to take something that's a very practical issue and try to take that level of conversation to actual parents. It's not just read by other philosophers who study this, but actual parents within a Christian framework. So it's intended to be either as a textbook or even read by actual parents trying to find some wisdom in daily life.
Why is this book significant for you personally?
Well, I have 3 kids, and so I'm trying to put some of this stuff into practice. But for me, in my research, I always end up focusing on things I'm passionate about, and this is one. And I think philosophy has something to say. At least the ancient conception was this pursuit of wisdom, and not just sort of esoteric, but real in the nitty-gritty of daily life. And so that's why I've tried to do this, to bridge that gap. And I think within the Christian framework, because so much of the discussion about family values and things in the last 2 decades, there's some problems there. And so I want to focus on values within the family itself and what things like compassion and humility, love, those sorts of things.
When did you realize that you would make very personal and practical topics like parenting and football a part of your research?
I think I sort of fell into it. I mean, initially, I just end up getting drawn to things like that. So I think it's just what makes me tick, and that's what motivates me to stay at this research. You know, the years it takes to do some of these things, you've got to care about it. And so it's the stuff that I'm naturally drawn to and think's significant for humans. Yeah.
How does your scholarship impact your role as teacher in the classroom?
Well, it helps to keep me fresh because I try to bring in the ideas I'm working on or thinking about, whether it's my own work or the work I'm reading to prepare the things I'm writing. And so I want to engage my students not just in the history of philosophy, but in how the conversation is still going on today. And I've used insights from students in papers I've written, give them credit, of course, but to bring them into it and to help them see that I value what they're thinking, I think that really helps.
And how do your students respond when you talk about your research in class?
Well, it's usually they like it. I try to avoid it because you don't want to make the class, or I don't want to make the class about me and what I'm doing, but about the ideas. But I think for them to see that I'm engaged in these ideas, that I'm working on these things, and not just pulling out a syllabus from 5 years ago and going through the motions, I think that's good for them to see.
Sure. Thank you. Let's turn now to your book on football and philosophy. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, it's a bit unexpected. You don't think of football and philosophy as going together.
But it's great. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I think it came out well. I think that you can see all these ideas about, like Vince Lombardi's philosophy of winning. You hear football coaches talk about my philosophy, but they usually mean on the field. But others mean in developing players in college football, for example. And so the idea came across. I've seen some on basketball and baseball, and I thought, well, there's a lot of stuff to be thought about with football too, and found enough contributors that had some good things to say.
Well, talk about some of your contributors, because you have an impressive list of people that participated in this book.
Yeah, many of them are people who work in what's called philosophy of sport, kind of like philosophy of religion, political philosophy, but they look at things like in the Olympic movement. Miles Brand, president of the NCAA, contributed a chapter on cheating. He was actually a PhD in philosophy and taught philosophy for many years, which is an interesting thing, which I wasn't aware of much before I started working on the book. Several that have former Olympic, U.S. Olympic trial cyclists who wrote about college football and issues of justice there, so from all over the map.
Well, and I didn't realize that Vince Lombardi himself had an undergraduate degree in philosophy.
Yeah, that he studied that and enjoyed it, so that was good.
Yeah. You authored a chapter on the justice or injustice of not having an NCAA championship. What do you think will need to happen for a championship or a playoff system to be put in place?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because I think all these issues of tradition, of money, of academic concerns that some people have, whether extending the season or what a playoff would do. But I think if history is the best guide of how these decisions are made, it usually has to do with financial interests of some people. And so I think that will be part of it. TV, the good and bad of the money coming in, might determine it ultimately. So I'm sort of torn because I love the tradition, but we've already moved away from that in some ways. And so if you think about, I mean, it's just odd that the only major college sport that doesn't have a playoff or a tournament is what used to be NCAA Division I football, right? So there's something strange going on there.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Very interesting. What other practical topics would you like to approach from the perspective of philosopher?
Yes, I'm interested in the past year or so on thinking about particular virtues, like individual virtues. So much, this is more like the ancient philosophers thought about, probably until about, well, the middle of the last century. People had set aside an approach to ethics and philosophy from a perspective of virtue, and they focused on certain rules to follow or a moral code. And now we're turning back to not so much what's the right thing to do, but the deeper question of what kind of person should I be? And so I'm interested in the nature of happiness and how things like, I've worked on compassion recently. And so those have practical import just in daily life, whether it's being compassionate to your neighbor or to the person in need down the street or across the ocean. So in those ways, those virtues, I guess, have a variety of ways they can be practically important.
You received a recent grant from the National Endowment of the Humanities to develop a course, an undergraduate course that contemplates, do we need God for the good life? So tell us a little bit about what you have in mind for this course and when it will be offered, and perhaps even where faculty and students can find out more about it.
Okay, yeah. I was excited to get the grant, of course. It's a stiff competition, I think, but the idea occurred to me looking at some sample questions, and I like this question because it combines both maybe the philosophy of religion question of is there a God or not, and then thinking about, well, what is the good life? Is it success? Is it power? Is it happiness? Fulfillment, all these different things that can come in. And so what I've tried to do and what I'm going to do is look at the history, and we're going to do this chronologically, of how this conversation over the centuries between philosophers has developed. So for example, you might think, look, either yes or no, you need God or you don't for the good life.
That's simple.
Or some people do and some don't. But of course, to even answer the question, what is the good life, right? And so someone like Aristotle says, yes, we need God, but just as an object or something to think about. And Aquinas, who took a lot of Aristotle's thought 1,000 years later, and a little bit more than that, would say yes, but not just to think about, that we could actually have this union or relationship with God. And then you get Friedrich Nietzsche, no, we don't need God because there is no God. And then the contemporary philosopher Eric Wielenberg wants to say, we don't need God because there's not a God, and because we can become good, unselfish people without him or her, it, all those different debates. So at any rate, yes, and then what does that mean, no, and why, and try to put these philosophers in conversation with each other, and then get the students to think about their own answer and what they think as well. So it's sort of a 2,000-year in a semester tour of the philosophical answers to the question. And so the first semester it's offered is next spring of 2010, and then it'll be offered again the following year, and probably in future years, even when the grant has expired, just because it's stuff that I think is really interesting to students and to me.
Mike, thanks for an interesting conversation. That's it for this edition of Focus on Scholarship. I'd like to thank our guest, Mike Austin, and invite you to read Football and Philosophy Going Deep and Wise Stewards, the Philosophical Foundations of Christian Parenting. You can find copies of both in the John Grant Crabb Library. Please join us next time as we continue to raise awareness and celebrate the scholarly and creative achievements of Eastern Kentucky University's faculty and staff. Thank you.